Welcome back. If you have a competition in any sport, the best way to prepare is to practice. Studying for your upcoming test should feel like practicing. Cognitive scientists have done lots of research on how people can successfully prepare for a test. You can use this research to your advantage. This lesson will help you to study or prepare for your tests and exams. You will also learn about the importance of spacing out your review times. When I said you should space out your reviews, I didn't mean to space out during your reviews. I meant to spread them out over several days. Remember the 137 study hack? You learned about it in the topics on note-taking. This is also one of the most effective ways to prepare for your tests. When you space out the reviews over several days, your brain has more opportunities to interact with the material. One of the best ways to study is to take notes, personalize them, review them, and summarize them. These activities count as studying. This is the first step in preparing for a test, and I really can't stress enough how important it is. It's much better to space out your reviews over several days rather than cram in last-minute study sessions. You'll remember more information, and your study time will be much more effective. When you have a test coming up, use the information that you gathered in your pre-test organizer to predict what the test will be like. This will help you get organized and know the best way to prepare for it. If you need a refresher about how to create a pre-test organizer, just go back and review the previous topic where we went over creating one step by step. The next step is the single best way to study or prepare for a test. If your book or professor gives you a practice test, be sure to take it. There are a huge number of scientific studies that show that one of the best methods of studying is to test yourself with practice tests. The act of trying to answer a question and then checking your answer actually changes the wiring in your brain to help you remember that information better. You don't even have to get the question correct. It's the process of trying and then checking your answer that strengthens the connections in your brain. The effect is so strong that scientists have a special name for it. They call it the testing effect. Taking a practice test and reviewing your answers will improve your memory of the material, and this works for pretty much every subject. It also helps you to figure out what you already know and what you should focus on during the rest of your study time. If you don't have a practice test already, you should create your own. This is an important step that you should not skip. You can make your own on paper or use an online program such as Quizlet or Google Forms. Try to create questions that are in the same format as the types of questions on the test. If you expect to see multiple choice, then make your questions multiple choice. If you expect short answer or essay, create practice questions in these styles instead. Also, try to make them as similar as possible to the questions that you think might be on the real test. When making your own practice tests, there are different places to find questions to include. Here are some ideas. You can start with the summary questions that you wrote in your notes on the left 1/3 of the page. Here is an example of a notes with summary questions that would make great practice test questions. Use the chapter headings and subheadings from your textbook to create questions. For this example, you might ask, what was the Sugar Act? Or when was the Sugar Act passed? Or what was the effect of the Sugar Act in the colonies? You might also ask, how did the colonists speak out against the new laws passed by the British Parliament? These are just a few examples you could use based on the titles of this page. For many subjects, you also want to include questions about vocabulary words, cause and effect relationships, and main ideas. If you have attended a study review session, include any questions that were discussed during this time, or any ideas for questions that you wrote down during the session. Finally, creating practice tests are a great activity for a study group. You can work with the group to come up with ideas for questions, or create your own questions and exchange them. Next, if your test will cover material that has been included on past quizzes or tests, you can use these to study for your next test. This is particularly useful for chapter tests that you have had quizzes on, or for midterms and finals. You can make a copy of the test, white out the answers, and retake the tests. Then, review any material that you answered incorrectly. If your teacher doesn't let you take quizzes or tests home, you can always explain this strategy to your teacher and see if they'll make an exception. Teachers are usually willing to help students that show that they want to put in the extra effort to study. Another method that is helpful is to cover the right part of your note pages and quiz yourself using the summary questions that you wrote on the left 1/3 of the paper. Check your answers at the end of each page. For example, if you were studying for a quiz on this topic, cover the right like this. Then ask yourself the questions on the left side and see if you know the answers. When you have finished, uncover the right side of the paper and check your answers. If you're creating a practice test for yourself, artificial intelligence can be a really helpful tool. We have a separate topic that goes into detail on how to use AI most effectively for studying. But for now, keep in mind that you can input your notes and ask it to create a practice test for you. You can even have it design one that matches the style of the test specifically. You can tell it to create a practice test that has multiple choice, fill in the blank, essay questions, etc. And add that you would like an answer key so that you can check your answers after you finish taking the practice test. Just be sure to check it against your notes to make sure that the answers are actually correct, because artificial intelligence does make mistakes sometimes, so it's not 100% reliable. However, it can be a really helpful tool, especially for creating practice tests to test yourself on your knowledge and understanding. The last test preparation strategy was developed by a famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist. One of the things Richard Feynman was known for was his ability to explain complicated material in simple ways. He developed a method of studying that is very effective. Simply pretend you are a teacher. Then try to explain your material to an imaginary child. Only use simple words and descriptions. Use only simple words and descriptions. If you need an example, check out the book Thing Explainer by Randall Munroe. You can view some sample pages online to get an idea of how to do this. The reason this works is that you can only explain something simply if you really deeply understand it. In the process, if you find yourself using complicated terms or skipping over material, then this is the stuff that you need to review. If you can't explain something well enough to teach it to someone else, then you aren't ready to be tested on it. Spend most of the time that you have left of your study time reviewing the material that you don't feel confident explaining. In this topic, you learned proven strategies for preparing to take tests. You learned about spaced repetition, which means it's better to study in smaller amounts of time for many days than to have one long study session the night before. You also learned that taking practice tests is one of the best strategies to study, and how to make your own practice tests using old exams, your notes, and even artificial intelligence. Finally, you learned the Feynman technique, which involves pretending to be a teacher and explaining the material to a small child using very simple terms. If you use these 3 strategies, you will find that you are fully prepared for any test that you face. For this week's activity, try out the 6 steps to prepare for your next exam.